Hey everyone, nice to see you all. Thank you so much for joining us today. It is time, so I'd like to go ahead and get started. So, welcome to our seminar today, which is the world of JE media translation, Japanese to English media translation. My name is Jessi, and I will be taking you through today's seminar. Yoroshiku onegai shimasu. Okay, I have some slides that I'd like to use as I go through the seminar, so let me go ahead and share those now. Okay, so here we are. Sub it, dub it, love it. The world of JTE media translation presented by JVTA. All right, so to introduce myself, I am an instructor at JVTA, which is the Japan Visual Media Translation Academy, located in Tokyo, but we also have a Los Angeles branch school. And basically, I oversee all aspects of our Japanese to English media translation course, where we teach the skills needed to do media translation over the course of a 1 year program. I'm originally from California in the United States. And for me, Japanese to English media translation really combines big two passions of mine. And that is my love for Japanese media and pop culture, which is probably the same for you who are joining us today, and also my love for languages and translation. And yes, so I hope that through our seminar today, you can kind of learn a little bit more about what this type of translation is like. All right, so I'll be leading you through our seminar today. All right, so let's get started with our first question. So, what is Japanese to English media translation? Media translation is also really commonly known as audiovisual translation. So, if you see this being referred to, when you look up this kind of translation online, you will also see it referred to as this as well. And you might think of, subtitling as being media translation or audiovisual translation. And you're right, that is a really big part of it, but it's not all of it. I would say that it maybe counts for 60%, a little over half of what we do here at JVTA. So, yes, subtitling is just one part of it. But okay, so along with subtitling, what else do we have? Different types of media translations. Let's kind of go through some of them here. So, the first one that I mentioned, subtitling. So, this involves translating dialogue and on screen text, which is then displayed on screen at an average of 12 characters per second. And I will go into more about this rule because this is the really important part about subtitling and also some other subtitling guidelines later on in the seminar. Dubbing. So this is where we replace some or all of the original audio tracks with a translation that is recorded by voice actors. And I would say that this one is increasing really rapidly these days, thanks to streaming services. If you belong to any of the big ones, like Amazon Prime or Netflix, Hulu, you've probably noticed. So they not only have a really big Japanese content library these days, but you'll notice that there are more options, not just English subtitles, but English dubs, and also dubs in other languages as well. So this one is, I would say, increasing. We didn't see too many dubs of, for example, Japanese films or Japanese dramas, even just maybe 10 years ago, but we're seeing a lot more these days. Down here, scripts. So this is the translation of the actual screenplay of a script or a film or a TV show, and it can also even include storyboards. And sometimes when we do translation of scripts, the actual work, the actual media hasn't even been made yet. But a translation of the script is needed for either production purposes or marketing purposes, even to get a project greenlit, for example. But if it's involving several countries, not just Japan, they might need a translation of the script first to get the whole project greenlit. So that's another area. Also, format and remakes. So this is a more comprehensive translation involving what's called a pitch packet. And this means that the translation comes with, extensive annotations or notes kind of explaining the translation. And this is done to prepare a series to be remade in another market. Like, for example, the example I have here, Iron Chef US. This is an example of how that was created. So Iron Chef, started as a Japanese TV show, but it was remade for the American market, Iron Chef US. And we're actually seeing a lot of global remakes these days. Some other notable examples, and that you've probably heard of Japanese media include, for example, if you think back to horror films like The Ring or The Grudge, if you remember, those originally started as Japanese horror films, but they were completely remade in Hollywood. And also live action remakes of Cowboy Bebop. And One Piece, which were, originally very popular anime series. So media translation really comprises all of these. All right, so there's a lot to translate when it comes to media. Now, media content. Okay, so now it's kind of more about what are the mediums, what are the genres that we translate when we are doing media translation. So let's take a look at this list. You can see we have a lot going on here. So it's a lot more than just, films and programs, as you can see. So let me kind of explain some of these. So films, for example, we have narrative film and also documentary film. So kind of, fiction and nonfiction. Broadcast media, which is anything that is going to be actually shown on TV, shown on broadcast media. B2B and corporate. So B2B standing for business to business, and corporate videos. So these days, basically with video being, so commonly used for, marketing purposes, that means that companies, they're not only relying on, kind of more traditional print media to promote themselves, they're making videos. And so these are called, corporate videos or B2B videos. We also translate a lot of these here at JVTA. Anime and manga, as I'm sure all of you are aware of, super, super popular. We'll be talking a little bit more about the popularity of these later on. Character IPs, which can be related to anime and manga, but not necessarily. But there is a lot that is, involved with a character IP. So when it comes to like, merchandising, collaborations, and a lot of these are also being done lately for a global market as well. So there's translation needs there as well. Formatting, licensing, overseas remakes, like I talked about, online content. So as you can imagine, this is also really, really booming. So videos that are being made for YouTube, VTubers also, a lot of them are, they're actually making content in English, but you also see a lot of translated content as well. Theater and musicals. If you're kind of aware of the whole 2.5D, musical trend when it comes to, this is kind of related to, the anime and manga IPs. Yes, we are also seeing actually some of these go abroad. I know Sailor Moon was one that actually kind of made the rounds in other countries. All right. Travel, tourism, promotion. So again, kind of like going back to the corporate videos for travel, video is a huge one for promotion. So, Japanese tourist spots are, now promoting using videos. And so they want, subtitles in English and also other languages for these. And of course, TV dramas. So, which of these are we seeing a large amount of lately? I would probably say these are ones that are growing. I would say, of course, we see a lot of them, but travel and promotion. A lot of people are coming to Japan now, for travel. And so that promotion, also the online content, and also the corporate videos, these are kind of where we're seeing some growth here. Okay, so kind of going along that same line, I want to take a closer look at the current industry trends and demands here. Okay, so where does subtitled and dubbed media end up being consumed? So I have a little list here with some examples. Okay, so let's see. I'll kind of put my examples here on the screen. Okay, so like I mentioned, online streaming services, this one is huge. The interesting thing about online streaming services is that the content library is being constantly updated. So there's constantly new content being added. And if you look at the Japanese content library, you will probably notice, new films, new anime, new dramas always being added basically by the day. International film festivals. Now, this is a really interesting one, but it might be one that you're not too familiar with unless you're really know a lot about the film scene or cinema scene, or if you kind of work in that industry. But basically, international film festivals. This is a big reason why a lot of Japanese film directors and producers want their films subtitled. To submit your film to an international film festival, if it's not in English, then it needs to have English subtitles. This is basically like a global requirement. And there are a lot of really big name film festivals, like the Cannes Film Festival in France is a big one that we hear a lot about on the news. And basically, a lot of film directors are not only looking at the domestic market, but they're looking at the international market. And film festivals are basically the best way to kind of get the word out for their films to get promoted. And of course, if they win awards, that's even better, for promotion for their films. Okay, global theatrical releases. I have a nice little poster here of Jujutsu Kaisen, which was, yes, released also, not of course, not just theaters here in Japan, but also theaters around the world. Yes, in-house. In-house meaning, for example, this kind of goes back to the corporate videos. But for example, videos that are used just in-house in a company, this also includes like training materials, training videos. We occasionally have requests related to those as well. And then, like I mentioned, online YouTube. I have an example of a VTuber here, one that we actually did provide English subtitles for at JVTA, and also online. So this still I have here is actually from a corporate video, and we see these corporate videos and online videos for websites, social media, anything like that. And going back to the international film festivals, here is just one example. This is one film festival that we work with at JVTA every year. It's called the Skip City International Film Festival, held in Kawaguchi, which is not that far from Tokyo. But this is just one example of the many film festivals that we work with. Okay. Now I want to talk a little bit about the growth of this industry. And if you look at the actual data, the numbers pretty much speak for themselves. So our first graph here shows the growth of Japan's content exports over the last 13 years. And it's pretty amazing. So looking at, the colors here, in the graph, we have films, TV shows, anime, video games, mobile and PC games, and then print. So a lot of Japanese media content has started becoming more mainstream lately, as opposed to being a kind of more niche interest like it was maybe even just, 10 or 20 years ago. And as you can see here, this is the part for anime. The anime part here in blue, it shouldn't be too surprising if you're a fan or even if you're just aware of the popularity of it in general. And we have another chart showing actually just how big it has become. So this is the anime industry market trends being shown here in a graph. So you can kind of see, TV, film, videos, but this pink part of each bar here, this actually shows the overseas market share. So look how big this is. This, by the way, the latest bar here, this is for 2022. And it kind of starts here about 2012, but just look how big that overseas market share has increased in just 10 years. And it will probably only continue to increase. And as for figures, okay, so what are we talking about here? We've got here at the top Sanchoen, which means we're in the chos, everybody. So that means Sanchoen is approximately 20 billion US dollars. So that means that anime is a huge and growing worldwide market. Okay, great. So now that we've taken a look at, kind of what the industry looks like, where the demands are, and taken a look at the growth, I'd kind of like to switch gears at this point and talk a little bit about the translation process itself, starting with taking a look at some different guideline basics. Okay, something I love to talk about. So first we have some translation pointers for dialogue. Now, the translation exercises that we will be working on after this are actually translating dialogue. So kind of keep these in mind for when we do the subtitling exercises. So these are the things that we need to keep in mind when doing this type of translation. Of course, there are, many more, but I've kind of brought it down here to just the basics. So the first one is language reflecting the character. Now, if you watch a lot of Japanese media or you study Japanese, you probably are aware that in the Japanese language there are so many different speaking styles, right? So we have, of course, very, very casual, rough speaking styles, but something kind of unique about Japanese is the politeness levels and the different levels of, how polite you can go. Basically, keigo, kind of the really, really polite language. Um, so you have these characters, in films and anime in particular. Anime, they have so many different kinds of really unique speaking styles, but you have so many different speaking styles. So when you are translating that dialogue, you need to be aware of the words you use, the phrasing you use in your English subtitles to best reflect that character. Can you properly kind of bring out the personality that is shown for that character by the way that they speak? And it can be really challenging. So for example, of course, like English does have polite language as well, but I think Japanese kind of does take it to another level when it comes to politeness. So if you are required to translate something that is super polite, you have to get a little bit creative with your language. So yes, language reflecting the character. You want to make sure the character sounds like kind of, you get the same image, the same personality, the same character as you would when watching the original. Okay, the next one, rhythm of the original dialogue. This one is pretty unique, I would say, to subtitling translation, and that's because our viewer, even if they can't understand the original Japanese audio, they can hear the Japanese audio, so they can kind of hear the rhythm of what's being said. So this means, for example, if you're translating a piece of dialogue and there's a pause, a significant pause in the middle, you will also want to kind of reflect that pause in your translation to kind of keep the rhythm the same. It also relates to the length of your subtitle compared to kind of the length of the original dialogue. To give a really simple example, like if a character is one character saying to another, Jane, just like, very simple, kind of they're finished talking, Jane, that's only two syllables, right? So when you're translating jane into English, ideally you would have something that is the same length. If you can come up with something that is about two syllables, even something like see ya, that matches the rhythm of the original dialogue pretty much perfectly. You wouldn't want to go beyond that, like have a translation that uses 4, 5, 6, 7 syllables, just because the rhythm won't really match that well. And if you do a good job of this, your subtitles become what we like to call invisible. And this is actually a good thing. Having invisible subtitles on a video means that the viewer is not even almost really aware that they're reading subtitles. That's because the subtitles feel so natural. They're not thinking about the subtitles, they're not bothered by the subtitles. And so if you do things like this well, have the right rhythm and things like that, then your subtitles will become invisible, which is what we're aiming for. Okay, the next one is adaptation of cultural references. So yes, because we're translating Japanese media, which features Japanese characters, often taking place in Japan, naturally, we're going to have lots of references to Japanese culture. So what kind of references? This is really broad, actually. Basically, anything that is unique to Japan, that could mean certain Japanese traditions, religious practices, holidays that exist only in Japan. I can think of one in March, White Day, for example. Japanese food, Japanese famous people, if they're talking about, let's say, a singer or an actor or an actress that is really only well known in Japan, these will all count as cultural references. And they can be pretty tricky. If you have that reference to a really famous Japanese singer, but your audience has never heard of that singer, how will you handle that? There's a lot of different choices that you can make when you do this type of translation. Another thing that also kind of counts as, I would say something related to culture are more like concepts. To give an example, something like senpai kohai relationships. This is a really big cultural concept in Japan, not so much maybe to the same extent, in other cultures or in other countries. But if it's part of the plot, if you have characters talking about, what their senpai said to them, or what their kohai said to them, and it's really important, that relationship, you'll also kind of need to think, okay, how can I include this nuance in my translation in a way that makes sense? You also don't want to confuse the viewer at the same time. So it's a fine balance. And this is something that we constantly need to be thinking about, how to handle these cultural references. And that really kind of all ties in with the last point, which is always think about how the target audience will perceive it. So that means putting yourself in the shoes of the target audience. So meaning, you have to kind of assume maybe your target audience doesn't necessarily have any background in Japanese culture or the Japanese language. So will your translation, feel natural or make sense to a target audience with that kind of background? We don't want to, have them confused or anything like that. If something like that happens, then unfortunately they're kind of taken out of the viewing experience. Our subtitles are not invisible anymore. Instead, they're kind of thinking, wait, what does that mean? I don't really get it. And now they're thinking about the subtitles when they really should be focusing on, the work itself, on the media and the experience of, enjoying the media. Okay, so just some kind of things to keep in mind as we work on our exercise after this. And now some subtitling guidelines. Now, the very, very basics. Of course, there are a lot more when it comes to working with English subtitles, but just for your reference, for each subtitle card, we have a maximum of 2 lines. And this is pretty universal no matter what language we're subtitling in. For English subtitles, we have a maximum of 40 characters per each line. And basically, it's a little bit strict here because when we say 40 characters, we're actually also including spaces and punctuation. Those are also counted as characters. So we want to keep it within 40. If it goes beyond that, it just kind of makes it really long on the screen. And then, the eyes of our viewer are kind of going back and forth, and we don't want to. We want to make it a pleasant, reading and viewing experience. And then readable amount of text, which is also known as our character limit. So we have here 12 characters per second. So what does this mean? Again, this is probably the most challenging part of working with subtitle translation. So 12 characters per second, this is kind of the calculation you use to calculate how many characters you can use to translate every piece of dialogue. So to give an example, if you have a piece of dialogue in Japanese that takes 3 seconds to say, you can go 3 times 12, and that gives you 36. So you can use 36 characters in English to translate that line. Yes, and one quick note about the 12 characters per second. Streaming services often will use more lenient character limits. Yes, but so these are just kind of really general guidelines that we have here. But as you can see, we don't really have a lot of space to work with, which is what makes it challenging, and also very different to other types of translation. Okay, and as for the translators themselves, so what kind of skills do they need to be able to do this type of translation effectively? They need a diverse set of skills, and we call them 6 skills for media translation. So let me go through these really quickly. Japanese source comprehension. So how well do you understand the original text? And can you grasp the finer nuances? How about idioms and slang in Japanese? As a reference, we do recommend having at least JLPT N2 or above to get the most out of the translation course. And then that leads into translation skills. So how well can you convey the nuance of the original in the target language? So that really comes down to, word choice, phrasing choice. And also, what's the most important information in each scene or line? This is also important, and it relates back to our character limit. Um, you have to not only be able to, understand each line, but also be able to prioritize what information in those lines is most important to the story. Because oftentimes, you can't fit in every single thing from the original, given the character constraint. Yeah, so with media translation, translating every single piece of info and, going for 100% accuracy, like you might, with like a legal document or something like that, is not really our goal. We want to create a, comfortable viewing experience for the viewer, and we don't want to take them out of that experience. Research. So are you able to confirm, important terms, information using reliable sources in order to keep your worth faithful, accurate, and consistent? English writing skills. So, can you convey the meaning of the original in natural sounding English that flows well? And this one is really important. You need to be a good, strong writer in English. It's not only about, how well you know Japanese. Your output language is English, so you need strong English writing skills. So, if you're thinking about getting into translation, definitely working on, brushing this up along with your Japanese language skills is highly recommended. and media analysis. So, how do you interpret the story as a whole, the characters, subtext, themes, genre? The easiest way I would say to brush up on this is to watch a lot of Japanese media. Japanese media, I would say, like, in particular, maybe films, have a pretty unique way of storytelling and, tropes that you won't always find in other media. So, you really want to get familiar with these to be able to understand what you are translating. And then lastly, here we have business skills. So, are you prompt, reliable, and professional? Are you able to communicate effectively with your clients? Now, translation work, is often done individually, but not always. There will be times where you work in teams or in groups with other translators. So, effective communication is really key here.